Welcome to the Financial Feast podcast. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Zach.
And today we're going to be talking about buying or renting a home. Which one's better? Welcome back. So I heard that you went to a Guardians game yesterday.
I did. My birthday is coming up, so Bethany, my wife, surprised me with the game. We had a good time. And actually, surprisingly enough, so I don't know how often you go to the baseball stadium. Their food, it's been a little bit for us.
Yeah.
We haven't gone since the early last year. And my wife, because of all our dietary restrictions, I don't really look at the food when we're at there because I can't really eat much.
Sure.
They have a lot of options.
Do they really?
At Progressive Field. Good job, Progressive Field. They have a lot of options.
Wow.
So that was cool. And they have a gluten-free booth.
Okay.
And I'm not just saying this because I'm trying to be like this, oh yay for the we got hot dogs there, all beef hot dogs. I would legitimately be happy with the hot dogs outside of the stadium.
Really?
They were
good?
Great.
Wow.
They were really good hot dogs. So I feel like when we think of Ballpark Frank, you're not really expecting anything. You're just like, okay, it's a hot dog, whatever. Yeah. It's gonna be $9 and it's not going to be great. But
maybe you get a pop with it.
It was fantastic.
Yeah?
Really good hot dog.
All right.
So I was really happy with it. And they have a lot of other cool options. And outside of gluten-free, they have pasta. People are making pasta at the game.
Wow. They're really expanding
since
I've been there.
Dante's Inferno is making personal pizzas.
Nice.
People in front of us are eating pizzas. There's a hot chicken place. Apparently, people are walking around with hot chicken. I think you can get chicken and waffles. I don't know, man.
Wow, they've really upped their game.
A lot of stuff there.
I haven't been there in about 2 years now.
So a lot of stuff there.
It's been a while.
So
for those who may not know, the Guardians are the former Cleveland Indians baseball team.
Yeah.
And we do like our Cleveland sports teams.
Yeah, and I was having a hard time yesterday calling them the Guardians.
I know, it's so hard.
It just keeps slipping, and I'm like, no, they're not the Indians. They're the Guardians.
Some, they will always be the Indians.
Yeah. So, and I'm not even that, I haven't been here that long. I've only been in Cleveland for 9 years.
Sure.
But I'm just so used to calling them that.
Yeah.
So for everybody who grew up here, it's got to be really difficult.
I know. Yeah. It's tough, especially with Tom Hamilton calling them the Guardians. You still kind of wince a little bit.
It's weird.
You know? It's weird. But Tom Hamilton's our announcer for the radio. He's pretty famous around here.
And he's great.
He is amazing.
He's great. He's got a great voice. He does a great job with the play-by-play. Easy to listen. I saw a guy yesterday, I'm pretty sure he was listening to the game.
Oh, yeah.
From Tom Hamilton while he was at the game.
Yeah, people do that. Yeah.
He does a great job.
It's unreal, but I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah, he does a great job.
But when we're talking about buying or renting a home, see that transition? How great was that?
Look at that. It's smooth.
So great.
It's smooth.
Great. But we're talking about buying or renting a home. And so there's a lot that goes into it, but one thing I will say is a lot of people have predetermined ideas on which one's already better, maybe based off of something they heard or an article they read.
They do, yeah.
But we're here to kind of break down and just show you the pros of both and let you make your own decision.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I think just speaking from personal preference, kind of growing up, we always owned a home. We didn't rent. So when my wife and I were looking at our first house when we were getting married, I really was pretty negative on renting. We were looking at it just to weigh our options and be financially wise. But I was like, oh, this is dumb. You're going to be wasting your money. It's not a good option because that's just kind of the mindset that I had growing up. But as I've gotten older and I've researched more and I've learned more and hopefully I've matured more, I've had friends that have rented. My sister-in-law, my wife's sister and her family are actually moving states in a couple weeks, so they're going to be renting. There's a lot of pros for it, which I think, for me at least, I was surprised as I kind of got into it and learned about it. So we'll just get into the pros of renting.
Yeah.
I think when people think of pros of renting, the first thing they probably go with is the flexibility that it offers.
Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest things, right? So typically you can live there for maybe you do a year, maybe you do a month to month, depending on the place. But it does give you that flexibility of if you need to leave, you can.
Yeah.
And it also allows you to kind of sample an area out, sample a bedroom size out, like if you need 2 beds, 3 beds.
Yeah, for sure.
And kind of help you figure out what you do want if you do want to eventually buy a house.
Yeah.
Or it can also help you with just knowing the area. You know, where is a good area? Maybe you just moved from another state. You have no idea what's a good area yet.
Yeah,
but if you rent first.
That's my sister-in-law's whole thing with why they're renting is they're literally moving across, I don't know, like 4 or 5 states different from where they're at currently. And they don't know the area. They've not really, they did like one trip to just kind of see if they like it, but they don't know the neighborhoods. They don't know the amenities that are there. Their kids are kind of growing up. So like, where they want to be in a year could be completely different than where they're at now. So having that flexibility where you're not buying a house and like, I put all this money up front on this house. I don't want to just move in a year. Like that's a big headache and a lot of financial cost. The flexibility of a rental, it's a big deal.
Yeah, especially that. And another thing that is a big deal too is the financial aspect.
Yeah.
So this allows people to have that kind of freedom of a house, right?
Yeah.
And enjoy kind of having the freedom of your own space that you can have. But you're able to do it at a cheaper cost, not so much month to month, but definitely long term. You don't have to do a giant down payment. Maybe you don't have 10, 20, 30K, depending on the percentage you want to put down and the percentage of the house. But it's such a huge burden to try and come up with all that money if you're just fresh out of college. You have student loans. You're looking to maybe get married, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're trying to settle down your own. Whatever the case may be, it's hard to also add that on.
Yeah, for sure. And in addition to that, your cost might actually be less than what your mortgage payment would be. So when you buy a house, not only do you have to, like you said, have all this money up front, but then you still have that month-to-month payment. Where with a rental, I don't have to put all that money up front. Now I might have to put like a month worth for a security deposit.
Sure.
But that's going to be significantly less than a down payment.
Yes.
And my monthly rent could still, even with all that in tow, could still be less than what I would be paying for a mortgage. So just the financial aspect for certain people in certain situations, I think it's important to realize, you know what? People are telling me it's great to buy a house, but right now I can't afford it. It's not the best decision for me in my current situation, and I'm not going to make a decision just because it might be good to other people.
Yeah.
For me, right now financially, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and the other thing that people might think of is, okay, well, maybe my monthly rental bill is like $1,000 and I can find a mortgage for $1,200. Well, that's only $200 more. That's so much better. But what a lot of people forget is the rental savings you have by not having to pay all that extra stuff up front, right?
For sure.
It usually combines your electric, your water, and depending on the rental agreement, maybe you have to pay some of it, maybe you don't. But typically your lawn, there might be something taking care of that if you even have one. You can structure it however you want or however the landlord wants, and you can both agree on that. But there's a lot less that you're liable for. If something goes wrong, you don't have to pay for it like you would if it's your own house.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just in that same realm, you don't have to have maybe as much of an emergency fund just sitting there, because I don't have to now cover the cost of when my dishwasher just goes kaput one day. I don't need to now fork up $700 to buy a new dishwasher because that's on my landlord. So I don't have to have that $700 sitting in my bank account.
Right.
So there's a lot of different benefits. Another thing that I think a lot of people might not think through is the amount of time that goes into owning a house. Where until you own a house, you don't realize the amount of effort you're doing to just upkeep or renovate or improve your home on a pretty consistent basis. So with a rental, you don't really have to do that. A lot of times because you can't, right? Like, I can't just decide, hey, I'm going to knock down this wall and make the room bigger and, have all this because it's not my house. Whereas in my own house, I might want to do that. But in our homes, we usually, most people like to improve. And as you're living there, you want to add things. So, for example, in my house, we've been there, I want to say 9 years now. And we've added a full bathroom. We've added a patio outside. I've put in more garden beds. We've changed out our backyard a little bit with the flowers. I feel like, oh, I put in a whole new walk-in closet for my wife in one of the rooms, and we've changed a bunch of stuff out with that. Yes, it's nice, but that was a lot of effort
Yeah.
and a lot of time that if I have a rental, I wouldn't have had to do all that.
Yes. Yeah. So those are just 3 quick points of the flexibility, financial stress, and also the time and labor costs that goes into that.
Yeah.
That does help with the rental.
Yeah.
That's really good if you're thinking of renting. Those are the 4 things you really should think about: labor costs and making sure that you have all that taken care
Yeah,
of.
and I think just really quick, a lot of times people also think, well, rentals are good for people when they're just coming out of college and they're younger and they might not have investment money or the amount of money because their job is maybe a lower salary because they're newer. Rental, like somebody in their 40s, these things that we're talking about could just be more beneficial for you in that point in time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to just be for 20-year-olds, right? It
Right.
doesn't also have to be
Absolutely.
for maybe people who are retiring. It might make sense for them, and we're kind of naturally drawn to that. It could be for 30, 40, 50-year-olds also, because these different options, depending on where you're at in your life, what your circumstances are, that could just be significantly more beneficial for you and your circumstance.
Yes, and I will say there's a lot of data out there right now that say that our generation, the millennials, and the generation after us, a lot of us are renting way more than buying. And I know a lot of it really isn't by choice. A lot of it just
Yeah.
because of interest rates.
Yeah, costs have
your
just gone up.
Cost of living
a
has
ton.
gone up.
Yeah.
But a lot of us are coming out with a lot of student loan debt, and it's really hard to also get a mortgage on top of that. And then, you might have credit card debt, car debt, and all of that. Throw on a house.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's the thing that makes it all go down.
And you might be able to afford a house mathematically, but it might just not be the wisest decision for you.
Not at this point,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, you can always
Yeah.
reevaluate too.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
the nice thing about that flexibility
Exactly.
is in a year you can do something different.
Yes,
So-
and it's easy to get out of it if
Yeah,
you need to.
exactly.
So that's the rental pros really that
Mm-hmm.
we encourage you to think through when we're going now shifting to more the buying pros of owning a home. We said a little bit about some of the stuff that goes into owning a home already, like the labor and all of that. The nice thing about that is it is your spot. It is your space. You can kind of customize it how you want, right? But more into that, it's the whole personalization of the whole thing.
It is.
You know?
Yeah. You can't do that in a rental house. I can't always decide what color paint I want to do on my walls. I have to get approval from my landlord. Or if he does give me approval, you might want to change it when I move out, and then I have to redo the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
I can't do whatever work I want to outside. I can't do whatever work I want to inside to improve it. And if I do improve it, right, I make changes, I'm not really seeing the long-term benefit of that because
Yeah.
I'm not getting the rewards of adding whatever improvements there are inside because my landlord is. So I think understanding that in a house, I have the option to, if I want that wall down, bye-bye wall.
Yeah.
Like, it's a nice thing. It's a nice benefit.
is.
So,
It really is. And another thing about that too is, we can talk about even the finances of a home, right, versus renting. So with owning a home, you have something that is worth something, right? You have
Yeah.
that asset. It is building, they call it equity in it. And equity is just the amount of money that if you were to owe $100,000 on a $200,000 house, then you would have that $100,000 gap in equity, meaning that you would be plus $100,000, right?
yeah. So when you sell that asset, that's the amount that you're going to walk away with
Yes.
in cash.
And theoretically, property values consistently go up. So theoretically, that you should be getting equity every year in your house. It could go up and down and fluctuate, but overall and over time, you should, when you buy a house, come out with earning money in the end
Yeah.
on that. The other nice thing about financially with a house and owning it is you're not subject to a landlord that might need to kick you out in 6 months or a year. You're not kind of living on that.
For sure.
You own it. It's yours.
Yeah,
So it's
or
really nice.
oh, the landlord just decided to raise the rates again.
Yeah.
Every 3 months, he just keeps hiking up the rates. I hear that all the time.
I do
I don't have
too.
to worry about that.
No.
So my landlord is my wife. She doesn't raise my rates.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. The other thing is a tax deduction too.
Yeah.
You can write off your interest on mortgages, which unfortunately right now, as we're speaking, it's still kind of high to
Yeah.
get a mortgage.
Yeah, very high.
Yeah. I mean,
Jumped up.
it's very high as opposed to the last few years.
Yes,
but
correct.
That's the thing is
Correct. It's all
overall,
relative.
it's all relative. Like there's a lot of people that have bought houses in the 70s that are like, you have no idea.
Yeah.
And so on. But for us,
We weren't alive in the 70s.
Right. We were not. We were alive when, 2% was considered very normal.
Yeah.
And now it's tripled,
Yeah.
And so to us, it seems high. But
Yeah.
once again, those always fluctuate too.
Yeah. So we talked about two different pros of buying, personalization and then different financial aspects. There's also the maintenance aspect of the pro of buying, where when I've talked to people, and I manage a couple different rental properties, when I talk to people who own rental properties, or when I'm dealing with some of the renters in the properties that I help manage, when there's something that goes wrong in that house, they have to then reach out to me. I have to then schedule a thing. I might take my time doing that. I might be busy doing things. It could be a day or two. I could be on vacation, right?
Yeah.
When they text me, and then whatever their issue is in their house, it could be a week until they finally hear back, because they might not have the go-ahead to make that decision and call a plumber to come in and deal with it. Their landlord has to do it.
Yeah.
In my house, I don't have to get approval for anybody,
Nope.
right? If something goes wrong in my house, I can immediately just make the decision and just call somebody to come and deal with it. I don't have to have that waiting game. And I know for a lot of people who deal with it, that's one of the more frustrating parts of renting is they have to kind of be dependent on somebody else to make decisions, and I don't have to do that in my house.
Yeah, that is a huge pro of renting.
Yeah.
Or of buying,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah.
And another pro of buying is also kind of the sense of community that you get, which
Yeah.
you might be able to get through renting as well. But with buying, you're putting your roots down, presumably for a long time.
Yeah.
And therefore, you kind of feel like you might belong in an area. You might get to know the neighbors. They get to know you. And you can kind of develop relationships with the neighborhood, and maybe your kids play with their kids, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it's a really unique thing that comes with owning a home.
And I think, like you said, you can do that as a renter, right? But if you have that mindset that you're going to get a rental and it's just a temporary thing, you're probably a lot less likely to really dig into that community and really build those relationships, because, hey, I'm going to be leaving in a little bit anyway. Whereas when you buy that house, you're really going to start to be able to connect with people, and you're going to have that sense of community, which is probably a little underrated. It's important to have that sense of, hey, this is where I live. This is, I could take ownership of these streets and the parks, and my neighbors can help me, and I have this relationship with this group of people. I mean, that's a nice thing.
It really is. It's very underestimated and underappreciated as well.
Yeah.
But all in all, as we always say, it depends on your current circumstances of whether it's better to buy or rent. But our whole thought about this was more show you what the pros of each are and have you make that informed decision. So we have an example that we'd like to go over.
Yeah, so we are not done.
No.
Episode's not finished.
Do not tune out.
Keep on it. So this is going to be really important for anybody who's listening on the podcast.
Yes.
I'm going to encourage you to go to our YouTube and watch the remainder, or just watch it all, because it's just fun to watch us, first of all.
Yes.
But at least watch the remainder of it, because we took time and we made some graphs, we made some charts that we're going to show in the video.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hold up my hand maybe, and KJ's going to be able to make it appear in my hand. I don't know.
Yeah, we're going to try our best.
In editing. But
Yes.
we're gonna have some graphs, and what we're going to do now is we thought it'd be helpful to work through a financial comparison, because we are the financial feast, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And we wanted to work through a financial comparison of renting a home and buying a home, and seeing kind of what it looked like over a period of time as far as total cost.
Yes.
Because we talked about a lot of different pros on renting, and we talked about a lot of different pros on buying. And I think flexibility is a huge thing for renters. But besides that one, the main benefit that people are really looking at for both of these options is financial.
Yes, I would agree.
So we wanted to really give you an example and work through what it would look like to buy a house at a certain price and what it would look like to rent that same house that has the same cost for a sale value, and what it would look like over a period of time, and when we're going to get to that quote unquote break even point on I'm now even. So before we get to that, why don't you just explain what a break even point is, and then we can get to the illustration. We can give them what we're going to be working off of and start going off of that.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the break-even point, that's kind of the point where two lines meet. So what we're talking about there is at what point when you buy a house and you're paying into that house payment, and then you're renting a house and you're paying into that rental, at what point do you pay the same amount? At what point do you hit, how many years, how many months does it take for you to hit the exact same amount that you spent on that house, whether you're buying or renting?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're talking about with the break-even point.
And you'll hear this a lot in refinancing. When people are talking about refinancing their home loan, there's a number of years that it's going to take you to break even from the cost of the refinancing, that you at least want to stay in your house for that period of time until it actually makes sense that the savings you're going to do. Yeah. So that's just what we're talking about. So what we're going to do is we'll just walk through some different numbers, explaining kind of where we're getting this information. There's a lot of different information, so just follow along with us. We're going to have the chart up if it's not up already. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through a home price that's $300,000 for both of the houses, right? It's the same house. It's renting for one option. It's buying for another option. And the way that I came up with these numbers when I was working through it is I tried to come up with a general average for America, because the problem is there's so many different variables in every state and every city, and it can really fluctuate a lot. So I tried to just come up with a general number that people can go off. So obviously, if you're looking at a house that's $200,000, then these numbers would be different. But it would still be the same principle: renting a house that's $200,000, buying a house that's $200,000, renting a house that's $100,000, buying a house that's $100,000. Right? It's still the same principles. Yeah. It just might be a little bit of a different number, but the graphs that we're showing should be pretty similar.
Yeah.
So we're working off of a home price that's $300,000 for both rental and buying. I also did, for a down payment, I did 13%, and the reason I did 13% is because I looked up the average for a down payment, and people said 13%. So because I think some people are doing 20%.
Yes.
A lot of people are doing less than 20%, obviously, because it dropped it.
Yeah.
So it wanted to give it kind of a happy medium. So 13% for down payment on a $300,000 house, so that's going to be $39,000. I also did two different graphs, which we'll see later, of interest rates. And the reason I did two different graphs is because the interest rates right now are pretty high. They're coming up to close to 7% in some areas. A few months ago even, really, a year ago, interest rates were significantly lower.
Yes.
And hopefully in the next year or 2 years here, they're going to drop back down. So I have two different graphs that show the same house, 7% interest rate, and then I did a 4% interest rate, which for a lot of people, that's more average of what maybe they're going to be looking at in a year or two. So we're doing that. Loan term was 30 years because that's just the easiest. It would be different for 15 or 10, but I just wanted to do 30 years. And then I did the monthly rent. So this is the monthly rent for the renter, but it can also be applied to how much your monthly mortgage would be. I did $2,200 for both. So for a $300,000 home, the way that I figured out the math, $2,200 was pretty even for if you're going to rent a house that's about that price, it's going to be about $2,200 roughly. If you're going to buy a house, depending on how much you put down, your monthly rent or your monthly mortgage payment is going to be about $2,200. So I tried to get a number that was pretty happy for everybody. All right, we're still on the same page?
Yes,
all right.
Still with you.
Couple more numbers really quick. Tax rate could change. Monthly HOA, it could change.
It may not even apply.
It might not even apply, but I'm just including these. We did homeowners insurance.
Yep, that would apply.
People need. So these are some things that we're not thinking of when we're buying a house. So some of these apply to a rental. Some of these apply to a mortgage, and they only apply to one of them. So a property tax rate, if you're renting a house, we're not thinking about that. That's if you're owning a house. If you have a homeowner's insurance, if you're renting a house, We're not thinking about that. So some of these numbers are this is why we're bumping some of the numbers up on one and we're not bumping the numbers up on the other. This is why the graph's going to be helpful.
Yes.
To help us see, well, the tax rate or the homeowner's insurance is applying to this, so how do we get this number? Because I applied it in the graph, so you will see it. So we're talking about home repairs and home renovations.
Yes.
Do they apply to a renter when we're talking about the pros? They do not. All right. So renter doesn't have this cost, and I did 1% of the total cost, which is $3,000 a year.
That's typical.
Pretty even, right? If your hot water heater goes out, you're $1,500 right there.
Yeah.
So I did income tax rate. We did buying closing costs and selling closing costs, which once again doesn't apply to a renter.
Nope.
But it is a big cost that a lot of people, when they're buying a house, they don't think about.
Yes.
They have closing costs. So I pulled those in. We did home appreciation, rent appreciation, general income. And then I just did a household income, general household income of $70,000, which is average for the Americas. All right? All on the same
Sounds
page.
good.
A lot of information. All right.
Yes.
What we're going to do now is we're working off of that. The chart was up. You could see it. I kind of explained it, but you could see it. We're going to get down to our comparisons here then in the charts that we did. So in the first comparison, we have a 7% interest rate.
Yes.
And what we see here is if you look at the orange line and you look at the blue line, they're running pretty much parallel for the difference.
Yeah.
The orange line is buying a house. The blue line is renting a house. What we don't see here is them crossing.
Yes.
What would the crossing be when we notice there's a crossing? The crossing is
The crossing would be the intersecting point, that point we were talking about earlier.
yeah, so it's that break-even point.
break-even point.
We don't see the crossing point here.
No.
4 years into it.
Not 4 years.
When you're buying a house, considering all the factors we're due, it actually takes you 28 years in order for the amount of money that you're going to be saving renting. It takes you 28 years to make it even. That break-even point when you're renting at a 7% interest rate, 28 years for you to actually make it make sense to rent.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
It is. And once again, these are all median numbers.
Yes.
So, but it does give you a decent idea that you might not have realized before of how different it is.
So in a 7% interest rate, right? Look how low I am.
Yeah.
In the rental. Right now it makes way more sense for me to rent because all the way up until 28 years in, I'm going to be saving money renting. This whole time, as we see the chart, it's just incrementally, I'm still saving money in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, all the way up to year 28. I'm saving money renting. So in this instance, it makes a lot more sense. If we go to the second instance where we have 4% interest rate, it crosses at year 7, which I don't actually have on here, but you can see it's getting really, really close. So
yeah. By 5, it's actually pretty tight.
Yeah, it's pretty tight. So 7 years in, it actually makes sense for me to buy the house because once I'm staying there after 7 years, I'm now making more money, including all the equity I have. So if we're doing a long-term rental where you're planning on spending 10 years at a location, it might not make much sense. But we can also see how much closer these numbers are. We can see how much closer the lines are. So even within 2 or 3 years, the amount of money is significant.
Yeah.
It's a lot smaller than it was in the 7% interest rate. So looking at the comparison on how it affects you specifically and your situation, I think people think, oh, I'm saving way more money buying the house, right? Because my money's growing, because I have this equity, because I own the home. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Because in both of these instances, it takes a number of years. You're actually saving more money when you're renting the house.
Yeah, and that is showing all of the extra stuff like property taxes and all of that like we had budgeted in. And when you look at it that way, instead of just looking at it as here's a rental payment, here's a mortgage payment, well, look at how different they are. I might as well just pay the mortgage payment.
Yeah.
Looking at it more comprehensive, when you're looking at all the extra stuff that goes with it, this is also not showing like garbage bill and water bill and electric bill and all that stuff that maybe you get a little discount on rent. Maybe you pay that, maybe you don't. Once again, it all is negotiated. But just knowing that there is so much more that goes into buying a house and being prepared for that is so key.
Yeah. Now, if you're planning on really staying, you love the area you're in, and you found a house that you really are in love with, it makes sense to buy that house potentially. Because if you're going to be in that area for a while, over a number of years, if the interest rate's low, you're going to be pretty even
Yeah.
in a few years. So it might make a lot of sense. But the biggest thing that I learned through this exercise is don't judge people who are renting.
Yes.
Because it might just make the most sense for them financially in the place that they're at. And they're not dumb because they're, at least for me, kind of growing up, it was like, oh, you own your house, you have equity in your house. That's a smart financial decision. Why would anybody just throw their money away, right? Because when you're thinking of renting, you're just like, oh, I'm just throwing my money away and I'm not getting anything back for that. Well, you are getting something back for that. You're getting a place to live.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might not be getting that equity, right, long term, but you're getting four walls, a comfortable bed, a kitchen space that you can house, right, and safety and security, and that's a big deal, and that shouldn't be undersold.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing you can also say too is there is the possibility of refinancing on a loan if you buy at 7%. So maybe the interest rates go down. Now, this could take years. You don't know. It's unpredictable. It could take years. It could be another 10 years before we see it as low as 2%. We don't know. But if you do like it and you're okay with the extra gap there and you can comfortably swing it financially and you like the area and you like that whole community sense and all the pros that we had mentioned before about buying, and you do want to do that and refinance, that is an option that you can do. But just being aware of how much more it is to buy a house versus rent is key, especially when you're first starting out.
Yeah. We bought our house when we were, oh man, I was 22 years old. I didn't know what I was getting into.
No, I didn't either.
I mean, I didn't realize all the upkeep and the fact that when my appliances are going to go bad, I have to fork out $1,000, a pop, right?
Yeah, it hurts.
Or in a couple years, I have to replace my roof for 12 grand or something.
Siding, all that stuff
I mean,
you don't think about.
You don't think about all that. So I think it's important to really realize what stage of life you're in, right? And consider what makes the most sense for you.
Yeah.
Because they're both very good options. It's not like you're dumb for buying a house, and you're not dumb for renting. You might be really, really smart for doing one over the other because in your specific time of life that you're in, it just makes the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And just keep this all in mind because the other thing, too, is when we look at that break-even point, one of the key factors to remember is when you're breaking even in that year, you're breaking even when you buy it on that equity.
Yeah.
So all that money that you put in, you paid and you paid and you paid, you're getting a lot of it back if you sell the house versus renting, you're getting none of it back. So just a reminder there on, that's why a lot of people sometimes would say you're just throwing money away because in their mind, they're just focused on the equity and not everything else around it and their picture and their personal circumstances and what's going on and how it may benefit them to rent instead and all of that. So just keeping all of that in mind, I think, is really key. And just hopefully you're able to kind of take a bigger look and decide if buying or renting is okay with you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So with that, we thank you for coming. I'll let Kevin do the close. He does a much better job than I do.
I just follow us on our social media. We have Instagram, Facebook. We do have YouTube, Financial Feast Pod. We're on there, all three of those. We also have a website, financialfeastpod.com. Check us out there. We have some blogs. We have a way to contact us. Get in contact with us if you would like to through email or chat. And we look forward to seeing you next time.